afternoon's roundtable discussion. Translation, American English, and the National Insecurities of Empire. A recent text essay written by Professor Vicente Rafael. I think it would be good to introduce some of the participants in the discussion. Right next to me, of course, is James Rafael, Professor Rafael, who's always willing and happy to be with us here at the Ateneo. And there's Dr. Bush Chalcita of the Social Anthropology Department. I can only introduce people I know. Dr. Leo Garcia, Dr. Lucas Kalin, Mr. Roy Tolentino, Mr. Malchi Aurelio, and Mrs. Rowie Asada Palacios of the Philosophy Department. And of course, Dr. Lulu Reyes, who really organized this afternoon's discussion. Lulu, would you like to introduce? Or they'll be introduced later?
I think we should introduce ourselves as we
okay.
go
All right.
on the roundtable.
Okay. And we'd like to welcome also, of course, the freshman merit class of Dr. Reyes. Okay. So this afternoon, it's a roundtable discussion on really two texts. The one I just read, Translation, American English, and the National Insecurities of Empire. And we were also asked to read Chapter 6 of the book White Love, also by Professor Rafael, Taglish, or the Phantom Power of the Lingua Franca. The structure of this afternoon's discussion will be really simple. Professor Rafael will offer us some background or summary of the text that he just wrote for a few minutes, and then we'll be opening the floor to discussion. There's also, of course, Dr. Kenny Santos. So, yes.
Do I need to use the microphone, or is it better if I speak like this?
It's nice to be here, and thanks again to Critical Culture and especially who virtually twisted my arm to do this. I was very, very hesitant to do this because I didn't have a piece that was directly on the Philippines. Instead, what I had is this sort of standalone essay on American English and the war in Iraq, which I wasn't sure whether or not there would be interest for this kind of topic here, but I still don't know if there is, so we'll see. But I'm assuming that most of you have at least glanced through the essay, and so what I'll do is I'll just contextualize it a little bit, talk about where this essay is coming from, how it's sort of located in a larger set of interests, or better yet, obsessions that I have over the years. With regard to the second essay, I just sort of put that in as an sort of that was my interesting thing. And I was rereading it this morning, and I realized how much of that stuff, because I wrote it back in 1993, how much of it was really outdated, and how subsequent work I've done has kind of, in a way, made that piece obsolete. So, you know, we don't have to discuss it. I mean, there's still some interesting ideas there that we could pick up on, but it's not something that we need to focus on unless there's some burning desire to talk about it. Anyway, with this paper actually, I wrote this paper right after I finished, or rather shortly after I finished the last book that I was before, which some of you might know is about translation and nationalism in the Spanish Philippines. That book forms a complement, actually the second volume, to the first book, which I think so you know, there's a whole series of ideas developed in those two books around the question of translation, its relation to untranslatability, the questions of power, authority, empire, and resistance that come out of considering that dialectic between translation and translatability. So a whole bunch of ideas that came out of those two books And I was curious to see if it was possible to actually apply those ideas to another historical and geographical context. So in between this, I was trying to write something on English in the Philippines, and I really couldn't think of anything interesting to say about English in the Philippines that haven't already been said. And so I decided, well, I realized I didn't really know much about English in the United States to begin with. And so I started doing some research on that. In between, I was also trying to justify all the time I spent reading the internet on the war. And one of the things that kept coming up, I belong to this listserv of translation studies. I'm not really in translation studies, but for some reason or the other, my work seems to circulate in the field of translation studies. And on one of the listservs, I started getting these postings about the fate of Iraqi translators, which I thought was extremely interesting. And so this essay really started out as a very short 7-page piece on this really started out as a very short piece trying to make sense of the situation of Iraqi translators. And eventually expanded into the paper that you have now, where I was trying to ask a very, very basic question, which is there an American notion of translation? Is there a notion of translation specific to the United States? Right? And what might that notion of translation be? And not surprisingly, and again, this is not necessarily limited to the US, I think you've probably seen this in other places too. One of the things that really struck me was the way in which, because I come out of an area studies program too, where learning a foreign language is sort of part of your training and your formation, where the idea of learning a foreign language, which is to say the idea of learning how to translate foreign language, is usually, if not almost always, contextualized within sort of very instrumentalist terms. Right? You learn a foreign language not because you love the language, but so that you learn foreign language so that you can be more American, as you say, so that you can be more regional, which I thought was very strange. It's a very instrumentalist notion, a very instrumentalist notion of learning foreign languages. You don't learn Hindi so that you could perhaps become Indian. Right? You learn Hindi so that you can figure out what Indian people are saying that might be useful for protecting the United States and the national interests of the United States. So there's always a nationalist context for learning foreign languages. Translation seemed to, in that sense, seemed to have been wedded not just to a nationalist project, but also to a nationalist project that also had global implications. As you said, that the United States was a global power. And it was this curious connection between translation and empire that then led me to begin to ask about, and again guided by my own research on the Philippines, to ask about the nature of the status of language, not just translation, but the status of language in the United States itself. And of course, historically, it's not very difficult to see how the United States, as a country of immigrants, is and has always been a